Hello, I'm Saboor, and this is my presentation of compare and contrast of active and passive transport. Let's begin. As we all know, our human bodies are very complex and made up of trillions of cells, and for these cells to survive, they must have a constant supply of vital substances or nutrients like water, food, oxygen, etc. The cell membrane is semi-permeable, and these nutrients need to be transported in and out of the cell constantly through the cell membrane. Now, there are two ways that nutrients are transported across the cell membrane: passive transport and active transport. Let's talk about passive first. So, the whole idea is to maintain external and internal balance, and passive transport is the movement of particles or substances across the cell membrane without needing any energy. It does not require any energy, it happens naturally. And there are a couple types of passive transport: osmosis and diffusion, which we will talk about right now. So let's begin with osmosis. Osmosis is the net movement of solvent molecules, so water, from a region of high water potential to a low water potential, equalizing the concentration on each side of the membrane and maintaining balance. The whole idea is to maintain balance. So in this, water particles are using this protein to, I'll tell you why they're using the protein. They're using this protein to go in and out of and get transported in and out of the cell to maintain a balance so there's equal amount on both sides. So normally these particles should go through the cell membrane without requiring this protein. So why is this protein here? This is the cell membrane. This is the lipid bilayer, and these are the phospholipids. The head is hydrophilic, but the tails are very much hydrophobic. These water molecules will have a hard time going through this because this hydrophobic area. These are offended. They don't want it. They don't want to be here. They don't want none to do with this. So water stays away from this and uses the protein to go through. And if the water tries to pass through this, the cell membrane itself just would be like, no, get out. Diffusion. Diffusion is the net movement of solutes from an area of high concentration to a low concentration, going down the concentration gradient across the cell membrane to maintain balance. Remember, passive transport, the whole idea is to go down the concentration gradient to maintain balance. So from here, high concentration and low concentration, and they're maintaining balance by particles going from high to low concentration. Now there's facilitated diffusion, which is a little different. In this picture, these particles look the same, but let's pretend that particles in this picture are bigger than these ones. And if they're bigger, it'll be hard to pass through the cell membrane like these particles are just doing. So these particles are just bigger. Sorry, excuse me. And they need a protein to pass through. And again, it is down the concentration gradient. So from a high concentration to a low concentration, it does not require any energy because it's down the concentration gradient. So comparison. Let's talk about this picture right here. This is high concentration, as we can tell, and this is low concentration. So area 1 and area 2. Passive transport requires no energy. It happens naturally because it's going down the concentration gradient and sometimes requires a protein channel like in osmosis where water can't go through the actual cell membrane itself, and facilitated diffusion because the particles are too big. Active transport, on the other hand, it's like not a little different, it's completely opposite, honestly. It requires energy because it's not down the concentration gradient, it's against the concentration gradient. It always requires a protein channel. The similarities between these two are just they both have the same function, involves movement of molecules, and the movement is across the cell membrane. Let's talk about active transport a little more after this example. Why does this require more energy? Why is this need energy and this does not? So, for example, when Miss Collins goes on paddleboarding, it's to like a river or any body of water. It's easier to go down the water, down the stream, than to go against it. So Miss Collins would need or require more energy if she was to go against the current. Same way, active transport requires energy because it's going against the concentration gradient. It's going from area 2 to area 1, which is not usually what happens in passive transport. That's why it's different, and that's why it needs energy. Active transport. ATP requires ATP is this. I will not try to pronounce it because I will butcher it, and I don't want marks taken off, please. But ATP is just the energy currency of the cell. And this is against the concentration gradient. That's why it requires ATP, and it always requires a carrier protein or a protein pump. So in active transport, the particles are basically move against the concentration gradient, which means against where they would normally would want to go. And it is basically opposite of diffusion. In diffusion, we know that it's going to go from high concentration to a low, but it's not happening in this case. It's the complete opposite. What should happen is diffusion, but sometimes cells want to keep stuff inside at all time or outside at all time. So it pulls or pushes the particles in or out against the concentration gradient, and that's why it requires energy. So you can say the main comparison between passive and active transport as if they require energy. Now, just like osmosis and diffusion were examples or types of passive transport, endocytosis and exocytosis are examples of active transport. In endocytosis, ATP, which is the energy, is used for the cell membrane to fold in and make a vacuole or make a pocket, sorry, not vacuole, a pocket around materials it wants to take in the cell. And the pocket then breaks loose from the outer part of the cell membrane and forms a vacuole within the cytoplasm, like it goes away. Yeah, it right here. It makes a vacuole inside the cell. And large molecules or parts of cell or even whole cells are transported or taken in the cell this way. Exocytosis, this method is kind of the opposite of endocytosis. Still requires energy because it's against the concentration gradient. So it's the ATP, the energy, used for vesicles to transport materials to the cell membrane and fuse with it to get materials outside of the cell. So once a cell produces substances for export, like it could be protein or just waste removal, or when the cell is trying to excrete waste, it goes through exocytosis. Why do we need both? So active and passive transport are very important processes where nutrients are transported outside and inside of the cell. Without this, cells will not get the nutrients that they need and we will all just die. Some nutrients are small and easily pass through the lipid bilayer, but some are big and they need other ways to get transported. Ways that are against the gradient or need energy. That's why we need both. We need active and passive transport. For example, a class is incomplete without Saboor. Miss Collins needs Saboor in the class to have fun. Without me, it will be all boring. But anyways, some processes happen naturally and don't require energy because it's less effort. And some need energy because it's more effort against the concentration gradient. It's against what it's supposed to be. So it's in conclusion, both active and passive transport works for the same cause, which is to transport materials in and out the cell, but with a different action or a different method. So one requires energy and one does not. This is my presentation. Thank you very, very much. Can this load? Very, very much for your patience.